Well, good afternoon or morning or whatever time of the day it is that you're watching this. Hi, my name is Carmen Scoggins, and today we are going to talk about some best practices for proficiency. And first of all, I'm going to start off with some introductions. As I said, I'm Carmen, and I am a Spanish teacher in Boone, North Carolina, which is in Watauga County. You might know where Appalachian State University is because that's right in our backyard. So I spend my whole day teaching Spanish at Watauga High School, and then I spend a couple of afternoons a week going to the university to Appalachian, where I co teach the methodology class for future language teachers. So I kind of get to live in both worlds, and it's very exciting. I'm sure you are pumped that school is about to start again. I cannot believe how quickly summer goes by, but maybe you'll get something from these webinars that will kind of inspire you and motivate you and get you psyched up for the new school year. I am going to be starting my 26th year in the classroom, which is so hard to believe. I taught elementary and middle school Spanish for 9 years. I'll be starting my 17th year at the high school, and I've also been at Appalachian for 17 years teaching Spanish and methods. So I have had quite a diverse career. And I'm also, if you're familiar with SCOLT, the Southern Conference on Language Teaching, I'm also the current president. So I love serving our region. Just because I think we're awesome. First of all, before we start, I'd like to give a big shout out to Carmen Villalobos for inviting me to do these webinars for you. It's so important that we as teachers keep up with things that are current and with best practices, and I certainly hope I have something to offer you as the school year gets rolling. So here we go. A couple of goals. I'm going to be doing several webinars with you. Actually, and the first one that we're going to do about best practices is split into two parts to make it a little bit more manageable. The first section that we're going to do today is from the teacher's point of view, and the part two is going to be from the student's point of view. So hopefully you can keep things sort of separated in your minds. But here are our goals for our times for part one. I can assist my students in setting achievable goals and reflect on my own practices. I can use backward design. I hope you guys use backward design and the 6 core practices to redesign a lesson. And I can guide my own students down their path to proficiency. As Ernest Hemingway said, it is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters the most in the end. And I think as teachers, we forget that sometimes. We are so used to seeing the end goal, the assessment or whatever we have to produce for administrators or whatnot, that we forget to just have a good time along the way. Remember those fun car rides you used to have when you were traveling around with your families? Enjoy the getting there, enjoy the journey, and let go some of the destination because that will come in time anyway. So here's how we're going to break this down over the next 2 webinars. This is actually a picture of a bulletin board in my classroom. A few years ago, actually probably about 7 years ago, Nicole Naditz, the Actful Teacher of the Year, had done this similar kind of path to proficiency as her syllabus. And I thought that is such a great idea. I'm going to make this something that my students can see all the time. And of course, I change some of the wording and whatever, but it's in front of my students' eyes all the time. And so their path is identify, reach, focus, assess, guide, train, process, and demonstrate. So this is actually going to be part 2 of this webinar on best practices, because I thought it would be better if we started with part 1, the teacher path. So this is going to be from your point of view, and our steps are identify, incorporate, utilize, plan, collaborate, reflect, demonstrate, and again, enjoy. All right, so let's dive right in. Here's the path one more time. Okay, so we start with identify desired results. You might know that terminology from backward design. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But what do you want your students to know, be able to do, understand, and then turn around and apply in some kind of real scenario, real setting? And I just wanted to start with this because I think it's important that you know how much of a journey this has been for us in Watauga County. We're kind of in a unique situation, which is not your story in Cumberland County, but we have only 9 schools in our whole district, 8 K-8 schools and 1 high school. There are no elementary or middle school world language programs, unfortunately. And then there are only 5 of us at the high school, and we only offer French and Spanish. So we're very limited as to what we offer our students. But because we have such small numbers of teachers, we're able really to work together well, because we can stay focused and be on the same page. But about 10 years ago, I guess, maybe 9 years ago, we decided to really deconstruct our standards, the essential standards from North Carolina, from the Department of Public Instruction, and we rewrote all of our learning targets. We do about 5 units per level of study. And just so you know, also, we do not use a textbook. We simply created the units based on what we think students should know, be able to do, and understand. And then we rewrote those learning targets in student-friendly language. And you can see all these colorful sticky notes, and you're like, wow, that's so pretty. But it was intentional, actually. I had done some reading. I serve as our department chair, and I had done some reading about learning targets. And the readings in the articles, I kept seeing that they were breaking them down into 4 different types: knowledge, skill, reasoning, and product. So I'm a very visual person, and I said, why don't we coordinate these or color code these for our students, so that anytime they see an orange learning target on the board, then they're going to know they're going to be working on a skill. So here's how it breaks down: knowledge is green, skill is orange, reasoning is red, and products are blue. And this is what a version of our student-friendly learning targets might look like. I can share what we've created. We've only done levels 1 and 2 for French and Spanish. If you want, I'd be happy to share these with you. You can just email me. So my students get these learning targets at the beginning of the unit because they are going to serve as a roadmap for us. You know, it's just like using a GPS. The first thing you have to do is put in your address. If you don't really know your final destination, you're going to have a hard time getting to it. So I tell the same thing to my students. So they get these at the beginning. We read over them. Some of them may have some background knowledge with Spanish, so they might be able to go ahead and say that they're on their way, but typically they're going to have no idea at the very beginning, right? These are novice low kids. About a week later, same unit, we pull these back out, and then maybe they're able to start moving their no idea to on my way or got it. And again, you can see once again the coloring, how we do this. Lots of skills in this first unit because we're just laying the foundation in Spanish 1, right? And French 1. Very few reasoning because that's a higher order thinking skill. And again, because our students' level of language is so low, they're not able really to reason very much. But this last one says, I can compare and contrast. And so those are terms that you might expect to match up with reasoning. And again, not as many products. Okay, so more skill and knowledge. Next, in the path to proficiency, how do you get to know your students? One of the things that I've sort of been on a soapbox about recently is building relationships with students. I recently had to renew my national board certification. So much fun. And one of the professional growth experiences I chose was to talk about how I build relationships with my students. Because honestly, if you can get your students to trust you and to sort of speak their language, so to speak, then they're going to want to learn from you. I'm a firm believer in that. So I spend a while really getting to know my students. Some of you might use some kind of a note card or a survey where they fill out interest. One of the first things I do, however, is like maybe the second day of school, they take a selfie because, you know, that's just such a trendy thing to do. And then I give them a list of verbs. As you can see, bailar, comer, viajar, all those things, they have no clue what those things mean. So I've just given them a list in Spanish and English. They quickly learn the concept me gusta without me having to teach it to them because they know this is going to be how they express things that they like to do. They encapsulate it into their selfie image and they send it to me. So not only am I learning their names, but I can associate their face, and I already get to know something about them, which I can bring up in the classroom when we're doing different activities and the different plans that I have for the day. So it really works out really well, and they really like it. Also, I suggest that you might once you're getting to know your students, just use them as clues in different formative assessment tools that you use. Of course, this is the OG Kahoot. And this is our very first unit where we're learning to describe ourselves and all those great things. And so I actually had the students write descriptions about themselves on a note card, and I turned those into the Kahoot clues. And one thing I found that was interesting is that the students didn't know each other. And so just by playing this game, we got to know each other better. We also used vocabulary that we were familiar with, but it also solidified that vocabulary a little bit more. So it works out well, and this is still part of getting to know your students. I suggest you might get creative with your syllabus. Kids don't want to read like 5 pages of just text. I don't want to read 5 pages of text. So last year I made an infographic, and if you click this image, it's going to take you to Pictochart. That's the tool I used. There are others. There's Canva, there's Easily, there's tons of other things. Even maybe Google Drawings you could use. But I made this one, so hopefully you'll have access to it and see it. This is way more student friendly, I think, because there are just a few things for them to focus on. There's my school email, my school Instagram, my Google Voice number, a couple of videos. You're also welcome to watch those if you would like. Here's our picture again, the path to proficiency. These are our 5 units of study, and because we don't have a textbook, I make websites for each of those, so each of these images is clickable and it will take you out to the website. These are a few of my favorite technology tools, so it's exposing students to what we're going to be using. As you can see, Canvas is a big one, and I know you guys are moving towards Canvas or already there. I talk about how I will assess them and notice. If you are familiar with the terminology, I've broken them down basically to the 3 modes of communication: interpersonal, interpretive, presentational, and summative assessments, and then classroom activities is where everything else falls. And a couple of suggestions as to how they should practice every day, etc., etc. So that's, in my opinion, kind of a more fun way to look at doing this syllabus. Another thing I do, I love some Snapchat just because it's fun. And I really think that the Snapchat filters make your skin look so good. So anyway, since students are really familiar with Snapchat, I decided to do my introduction that way.
Hola alumnos y bienvenidos a la clase de Español 1. Me llamo señorita Scoggins y yo soy tu maestra de español. Hi guys, welcome to Spanish. Can you believe it's time for another school year to begin? So I'm going to outline a couple of classroom expectations and the materials you need to bring, so just listen up carefully.
Okay, let's talk school supplies for Spanish. You're going to need your Chromebook every day. You definitely will need some headphones or ear.
Okay, so you get the idea. I just like using the different filters. The kids thought it was hilarious. It was quick information that they needed without me going on and spending the whole first week of school telling them what they need. They can just watch this video and it's done. And when I guess some of you are going to be watching, one of the webinars I'm going to do for you guys is about technology tools specifically. And I am going to talk a little bit about Canvas. And this is on my Canvas page for each class, and I'll show you that again in the next couple of webinars that we do. Okay, so we're just going to move on from here. It's so much fun though. Try it. Okay, so now we've talked about identifying our desired results. So we've focused on our learning targets. We've taken into account what students like. I mean, we just, we're human beings, and that's a huge part of teaching. We teach so much more than the language that we teach. And so by getting to know those students even better, you're going to have a deeper bond with them and a better relationship. So now we're going to move on to utilizing the 6 core practices. Now, I could spend hours and hours talking to you about the 6 core practices. If you are not familiar with these, all you have to do is Google 6 core practices, and you're going to find lots of helpful articles that aren't very heavy, so that they're quick reads by some of the top world language educators in the country, and just to get a better idea of what's going on. But here is practice 1, and we're going to go through these very quickly. But these are some things you need to be thinking about as you do your daily lesson plans, your unit plans, etc. So core practice 1 is using the target language. Now, ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, recommends that we use 90% or even more of the target language in our daily instruction in the classroom. Now, just look into your hearts and souls and think about your number. Is it 90%? I'm going to give you 5 seconds to reflect. Okay, you have your number. Now, I can be honest with you and tell you that my number is not always 90%. Certainly, that's what I strive for it to be. And of course, if you teach Latin, then, unless you do spoken Latin, which some teachers do, then your target language usage is going to fall in different categories other than spoken language. But if you're teaching Chinese or French or Spanish, German, whatever you're teaching, then our goal is to use the target language as much as possible, because we want to talk through using the language, not talk about the language. And I think that's kind of how so many of us were trained, is that we do lots of grammar drills and we learn lots of vocab lists, but we never really use the language conversationally, and that's really what kids want. So strive for 90%. If your number was 40%, then don't try to do 90% the first semester. Maybe try to jump to 60% or 70%, and don't be too hard on yourself. If you're slowly increasing your target language usage, then you are golden. And establish routines in the classroom. So when you say, saquen una hoja de papel, the students know exactly what to do. And be intentional in your planning. The more you plan for target language usage, the more you will do. If you guys are familiar, I don't know if you know Meredith White, but she is a rock star and she's in Atlanta. She was on the Skull Board and she just presents all over the country. But she even suggest videotaping yourselves. I know we love to do that, but she would do that a couple times a week, and then she would pay attention to the time she slipped back into English and really reflect and say, now, why did I do that? And how could I have structured the language I wanted to use so that I could stay in Spanish? That's her language. So what a great idea. Now, I haven't taken that plunge yet, but it is one of my goals to videotape myself more often to see what I can do to improve my own usage of Spanish in the classroom. Okay, great. So that's the first core practice. The second one is interpersonal communication. And again, this goes along with what we're talking about, using the target language. But what does that really mean? I think sometimes when we give students activities where they just have to talk to one another, like infogap activities, where I have some information that someone else needs and vice versa, we say, oh, they're speaking interpersonally. Or if we have them memorize some kind of skit, then that's not really interpersonal, that's more presentational. Interpersonal is non-rehearsed, spontaneous. There should be a reason for them to negotiate meaning from something. So you might do something like speed dating, where I know the things I like to do and my favorite color and whatever, but I don't know what I'm going to have to say until my partner asks me the question. Now, with novice low or novice mid kids, we're expecting them to use a lot of memorized words and phrases, and that's okay. But the idea that it's spontaneous and non-rehearsed lets the students feel like they're really communicating, even if they get stuck on different words. Give them some strategies to be able to fill in gaps instead of saying all the time. And try to use authentic resources as much as possible. If you give two kids a menu and they have to say, ¿Qué prefieres? What do you want? Or what are you going to order? Or what are you going to drink? Or whatever. Then nobody knows what's happening until someone asks the question. So try to make it very intentional. Okay, core practice number 3. Design lessons and tasks that have functional goals and objectives. And that merely goes back to those learning targets that we've already talked about. And backward design. And we're going to talk a little bit more about backward design in just a minute. But being intentional, again, putting those learning targets even in front of your students so they will know what their destination is. If you do use a textbook and you're just flipping pages and doing different activities in the textbook, and then all of a sudden it's been 2 weeks and you say, oh, it's time for a test, have the kids looked ahead? Did they know this is what was coming? But if you give them something in front of them all the time, I put my daily learning targets on the board. They get the bigger learning target sheet at the beginning of the unit. And then I try to pull out 2 or 3 that we're going to focus on for that day so that it's not so overwhelming. And then they can see those when they come into the classroom so they know where we're heading. Okay, don't make learning a mystery. Core practice number 4. We all love to teach grammar, otherwise, we probably wouldn't be language teachers. But one of the big pushes, actually for a long time, has been to not teach isolated grammar. And we know that's a struggle because that's the easiest way to do it. But try to teach grammar in context. Bring in a song where if you're focusing on the past tenses in Spanish or French or whatever, then have those, that's an authentic resource, first of all, and they'll be embedded in the song. And then you can teach the grammar as it's needed and not discreetly before you see it in a context first. I'm not describing this very well for you, as opposed to saying, okay, this is the conjugation for the preterite past tense or the imparfait or whatever in French. And now they can see it actually in the song. They can begin to see the patterns without you having to explicitly teach them that specific kind of conjugation. You might think of a need for the grammar, like how do we use adjectives in real life? Have you ever asked yourself that question? I ask myself, my students, that I'm like, how do you use adjectives in real life? Well, when you need to describe something, I'm like, but tell me when that would be. Okay, let's say you're going to go on a dating website and you're going to describe yourself. That's more real use of grammar. So the more activities you can incorporate like that, the better off you're going to be. Let's say you get robbed and you have to describe your assailant to the cops. That's another real use of language. Now, that's an unfortunate use that you might have to use one day, but it's the idea of making grammar real for students. Core practice 5 is authentic cultural texts. This is listening comprehension, so this is the interpretive mode. And again, I'm going to give you a hashtag authres, AUTHRES. It's short for authentic resources. And if you just put that even online, you're going to come up, or Twitter or Instagram, you're going to be given a billion different options of authentic resources that you can use in your language classroom. So these are things, again, like movies, stories, commercials. Infographics are so great for language learners because there's not much text on an infographic. And then you can scaffold the questions you ask, or the different activities you want the students to do with those authentic resources. And 10 times out of 10, they're going to be cultural. And an authentic cultural text is something that was designed for the speaker of that language. So that's why commercials are so great, because I can show them an iPhone commercial in Spanish that was designed for speakers of Spanish, not speakers of English. But then I can scaffold the questions in such a way that meets the level of language of the students. And here's a key phrase that I've heard over time. Remember to modify the task, not the text. So whatever text you choose, you can write any kind of question that would go with it for your level of language for the students without having to manipulate the text at all. Core practice 6. This is our favorite thing to do as educators: grade papers or online assignments, and then to give appropriate feedback, right? It takes so much time to do that, but we know it's important. I always ask my students to do a final evaluation of me, even though we don't require them at my school, because I want to know how I can be a better teacher. And, a couple of times this spring, some of my students said, well, we didn't get much feedback, or the feedback we got came a couple weeks after we finished something. So it's horrible to hear, but it's true. We have to be very intentional in our feedback. We have to, it has to be ongoing. We can't give them feedback a month later if we've been working on a skill that they needed a month ago. So as much as we don't like to do it, think about how you can give quick feedback. And one of the things I'll talk to you about in Canvas is using spoken feedback instead of having to write everything down. Also, those quick formative assessment tools that we use, like Kahoot or Gimkit or quizzes or those kinds of things, that lets the students know where they are immediately without you having to give them the feedback. So that's kind of cool. I'll mention some other things I do, like I try to conference with students and maybe even let peers give each other feedback. So that takes some of the pressure off you. Okay, so those are the 6 core practices in a nutshell. And again, if you want more information, you can email me or you can just Google the 6 core practices. And I promise you, you will find lots of great things. Okay, so along with utilizing different things like the 6 core practices, we have to plan. Now, I'm not sure if you're in a situation where you have to turn your lesson plans in like 2 weeks ahead of time. That would drive me crazy. Because if we know that best practices of teaching means that I'm not going to really know where my students are in 2 weeks because my lesson plan is going to be changing daily. However, depending on your situation, you might recognize this the OG, the 6 point lesson plan from North Carolina, focus on review, statement of objectives, teacher input, guided practice, independent practice, closure. That's how we ran things for years and years and years in this state. I'm going to call that a little bit old school. And I want you to think about backward design. The 3 steps of backward design are identify your desired results, as we've mentioned, the learning targets, determine acceptable evidence. That's actually planning the assessment. So if I think of my starting point as what do I want the students to know, be able to do, and understand, that's the first thing I look at. So those are the little stops along the way. If you think about this as a GPS or a roadmap, your final destination is the address that you would put in, and that's your assessment, your final assessment. And then you plan your learning experiences, and that's your daily lesson planning. So as you begin to build your unit, think of a parentheses. You've got your learning targets at the beginning, your assessment at the end, and you plan your how you're going to get the students to that destination. Backward design. I can't live without it. I don't know how I lived without it. Try it. Oh, and just so you know, this is sometimes called Understanding by Design, UBD. You might hear that as an acronym too. Okay, something I did, and I don't always use this, but I created this lesson plan guide. If you click it, I'm not going to take the time to do that right now, but if you click it, you have access to this. So feel free to make a copy. Actually, I will click it. Oh, yeah, I want you to see the whole thing. So this helped me. I did a workshop a while back on backwards design. And again, you can see the stages: identify desired results, determine acceptable evidence, and then plan your learning experiences. So I have those. But what I did was even build in a box that is for formative assessment. How am I going to check for understanding? As I do this skill or concept, what am I going to do to make sure students either get it or on their way or have no idea? Am I going to use technology, some kind of technology tool? Are we going to use some kind of speaking thing? Am I going to ask them to give me a thumbs up, thumb sideways, thumbs down, or whatever? But that way, if kids get it, then I can say, hey, why don't you spend a few minutes doing this? If they're on their way, spend a few minutes doing this. And if they have no idea, then I can pull those kids aside and work with them one-on-one while the other kids are doing something that benefits them instead of making everyone wait. You know how boring that gets sometimes. So, but I wanted to show this to you because at the bottom, I also have the reflection piece. And again, we'll talk about reflection more in a minute, but that is such a critical part of teaching. What went right, what didn't go so well. So you have access to this if you would like it. Yay. Okay. And if you think about reworking, let's just say maybe set as a goal for yourself to take one lesson that you really like, but that might be getting a little bit dated, or something that you have to teach, and maybe rethink a way to freshen it up just a little bit. So here's what I suggest: that you keep what works. I mean, why start from scratch if something's working? Now, if it's something that's working that's about 20 years old, you might want to still try to modernize it a little bit so the kids are not like, oh my gosh, where did she get this picture? Okay, but keep what has worked. Drop what didn't, or anything that's out of date. Reflect and ask yourself, how can I make this better? And then rework all those old tired ideas. It frustrates me sometimes when some of my friends who aren't teachers say, wow, you must have this down now because you've been teaching for so long, that you can just pull out your old stuff. Well, yes, thank you so much. I do use some old things. I certainly do. But that's what keeps me fresh, is trying to reinvent myself. I'm not starting from scratch because of all the things I have learned on my own journey, on my own path to proficiency. but I'm just thinking of a new way to do it. So first of all, I don't get bored, because here's the thing, I'm going to tell you, if I'm bored, they're bored, the students are bored, right? So I try to come up with new things. Plus, there's new authentic resources coming out daily. So why use something that's 20 years old when I can go online now and find something that's a lot more new and fresh and that the kids can relate to a lot better? For example, old school textbook. You probably maybe recognize this. This is a unit on describing, so adjectives. Okay. Then I took it a step further. We made some wanted posters. They're hanging in the hall. How could I have made this better? Well, none of my characters in the wanted posters are authentic cultural people from the target culture. I use characters that the students would recognize, like Wonder Woman, Darth Vader, Stewie from Family Guy, things like that. However, I'm okay with that because they know who these people are and they're able to describe them easier. This is part of the scaffolding thing I was talking about earlier. But taking it one step further with an authentic resource, I use the song Bonito, which I'm sure most of you Spanish teachers are familiar with, and now my students can watch the video and describe the people that this guy meets along his road of life, the path of life. And then we can have a conversation about what the song means and what he's trying to say. I can show adjective agreement if I put the lyrics up without having to explicitly teach that. So that's what I mean about using grammar and context. And there's the hashtag authres. So that works out. And this is a lot more fun than me asking the kids, numero uno, ¿cómo es Ana? This is a lot more alive. Okay, you get the idea. Okay, so now we've identified our results, incorporated the student's interest, we talked about the 6 core practices and planning. We are halfway through our path. And again, this is my suggested path, teacher path, but yours might have different action words. Okay, so next is collaborate with your colleagues. Some of you might be the only language teacher at your schools. And I'm sorry if you are, because man, I like to talk about what I love to do with other world language teachers. So some of the ways I do that is through social media, as you can see. And these are ways you can contact me if you're interested in being my friend on Facebook, or this is my personal Instagram account. I do have a school Instagram account, and we'll talk about in part 2 of best practices. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Carmen Scoggins. And this is a sign that's hanging on my door. This was a movement a while back, hashtag observe me, but I want other teachers in my building to feel free to come see me. I get asked a lot, well, can I come and observe one of your classes? I'm like, at first I'm like, oh God, more stress. But I think it's okay, because even if what I'm going to do for the day isn't perfect, it's still real. And it's important to see what's happening in your own building. So I challenge you maybe to hang something like this on your door and see what happens. So collaboration is just huge. Together we can do a lot more than we can individually. So seek out someone to collaborate with, even if it's me now. You can email me anytime. I'll be happy to chat with you. And the last, oh no, it's not the last, but one of the most important parts of this path, the teacher path to proficiency, is reflection. And you might do that with something simple like sticky notes. I love technology and I'm fairly tech savvy, but I do not like to do my lesson plans online. I still handwrite my lesson plans using this template, and because I want to see it in front of me, and that way when things aren't going well or they are going well, I can just take a quick sticky note and just jam it down wherever it goes in the lesson plan. Or I can write, we didn't get to this, remember to think about this for tomorrow. And again, that's why my lesson plan is constantly alive. It's not something I can turn in 2 weeks ahead of time. You might just have a space on your lesson plan, like on that template that I designed for you to reflect. I just like sticky notes better. I even have a little notebook sometimes that I write my reflections down in. But a while back, again, going back to Snapchat, I was like, man, I hate taking the time to reflect, but it's really important. So I just started reflecting, and I only did this for about half a year, but I would reflect every afternoon at the end of the day on Snapchat. Here are a couple.
So today was a good day at school. We celebrated Valentine's Day, lots of love in the air, and we actually watched the animated short Cuerdas, and maybe that wasn't the best choice because it's a little bit sad. So we did a little crying on Valentine's Day. What else is new for me?
Okay, so it's just remembering what happened.
So today is Friday, March 2nd. Can't believe it's March. And we had a 3-hour delay this morning. Crazy stuff. So it was a good day. Got to spend some time introducing some new material to students, and that's always fun. And yeah, so I'm excited to have them more consistently and see them next week. Happy weekend!
So the irony of this is the reflections that come after that. In we're in North Carolina, but it snows a lot up here. We typically miss around 20 days of school year for snow. And so I was so pumped to see them. And then we didn't go back to school for like another 4 days after that. So it's funny now when I go back and watch these. Okay, let's move forward. These are my two faves. This I'll play. This was a well. I'll play this one. This is my very favorite one I ever made.
Man, what a long day. It's only Tuesday. Got a lot more to do this week with the kids. Getting ready to go to school next week. Gotta keep my game face on. Here it is. Game face.
Right. So just taking a minute and literally whatever I say, I never plan what I'm going to say, so it just comes out, and inevitably I'm cracking myself up. Last day of school.
So today was the last day of school. I'm pretty pumped.
Anything that just makes you laugh. Remember, I said this is part of the journey, enjoying the ride along the way. Okay. So now identify, incorporate, utilize, plan, collaborate, reflect. Just two more steps to go. Demonstrate, share your experiences. Now, some of you may be brand new teachers, so you're just getting your feet wet, but I encourage you to attend a conference if you can. Of course, Carmen Villalobos has prepared some professional development for you guys, which is amazing. But if you do get some funding, maybe you could write a grant or something, or maybe your school can help you fund a trip to Flank. Flank is always in October, and it's our state conference. It stands for the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina. I am a past president of Flank. I'm an honorary life member. I present there every single year. So if you get to come to Flank, please come up and introduce yourself to me, because I'd like to put some faces with you guys who are just listening to this webinar. And it's so great just to collaborate with other people from across the state. SCOLT is the regional foreign language organization. It's 13 states in our region, and this is the organization of which I am president right now. And again, it's just a slightly larger scale, so the different we offer typically more languages are seen or heard at SCOLT. And this coming or school year, it's actually 2020, we are going to be in Mobile, Alabama in March. And ACTFL is the big boy, the National World Language Organization, and they have an annual conference, and it's always the week before Thanksgiving, so you know right when it is, and it's going to be in DC this year, so we're pretty pumped about that. This is me actually presenting at ACTFL. I run the social media lounge, and it's in the exhibit hall, so it's kind of a different presentational space for me, and people just come and hear these quick little 30-minute sessions that I give usually on technology. So that's kind of fun. But, share your experiences with someone. You don't have to do a formal presentation. But even if you just partner up with someone at your school or someone in your county and just say, hey, these are things that are working well for me. Or maybe you have a PLC, professional learning community, or professional learning network. And again, just share something small, a success story or an activity that you really enjoyed doing with students, just to put yourself out there a little bit. And before you know it, you'll have a toolbox that you can go and share at Flank or SCOLT or ACTFL. It's really fun. And the final thing on the path, the final note to remember is just enjoy what you do, right? Smile. Be friendly with the students. Don't seem like you're miserable every single day. Have a good time. Be one of them. This is me being goofy with kids. These are my ASU students my method students, and we just enjoy being together and learning together and just having a good time. You guys represent all different languages and cultures, and some of you are, of course, are native speakers of the language you teach. Share your experiences from your own home culture. When I travel, anytime I travel or anytime I present, I involve my students so that they are a part of everything that I'm doing. It also is cultivating some of those softer skills, some communication skills, some leadership skills that I'm also trying to teach them other than just Spanish. Just show them parts of the world. Where I live, we are very isolated geographically because of the mountains. So some of my kids are from more rural parts of the county. They've never traveled, they've never gone anywhere. Then I have other students who have traveled extensively. But if I can kind of bridge that gap by talking about my own experiences, it just makes kids really want to have a different life than those kids who never get to go anywhere. They think, wow, she's doing this all by herself. I can do the same kind of thing. So I'm just putting a message out there for students. And then, of course, this is me agreeing like an idiot to have pies thrown in my face just to raise money for something. But again, this makes me more vulnerable to students and puts me out there a little bit. And I don't know. It was fun, and I had a good time. I did not even I only raised like $10. And I had whipped cream in my ears and stuff for a long time, so it was kind of gross. But it was fun. Anything you do like that just makes you seem more real to your students. Again, it goes back to building student relationships. Okay, here's the path one more time. As you can see, we have now quickly hit each target, all of these things. And again, you are welcome to take something like this. Now, I used the infographic tool easel.ly, easily, to make this as an infographic, which I then turned it into the bulletin board as I mentioned. But you are welcome to use the same wording that I have. You're welcome to change anything if you want. Again, this is the teacher path, and in part 2 of best practices for proficiency, we will talk about the student path. So, in conclusion, I suggest that you set a couple of goals for yourself. Again, I started out by saying don't get overwhelmed by all the suggestions I tried to give you. Just take a couple of things that you might like to try this year and see if it works for you. And, the great thing about this is if it doesn't, hit Control Z. You know what that does? It undoes what you just did. So don't be afraid to try. Take risks. That's one of the other things that I try to model for my students. When I want to try a new tech tool, I just go for it. When I want to try something new, I just go for it. And if it doesn't work, then I reflect and I say, whoa, I'm not ever going to do that again. Or maybe, what if I try it with this modification or whatever? So Control Z is your best friend. I hear you. We get overwhelmed sometimes. We want to try new things. We don't know where to start. Feel free to email me or follow me on Twitter. Ask me a question directly. I am happy to help you. And this is my personal email instead of my school email, just because it's probably easier to get to me that way. So I'm here for you. And all I'm going to say is I'm excited for you to think about your own teacher path. And let me know if you have any questions. You have got this. Good luck starting the school year, and look out for part 2 coming your way soon. Thanks, guys.